Hello again, everyone. It's with very pleasure, lots of pleasure that I'm here with you today, presenting a visiting student, Fanni Beck, who is a visiting researcher at CIES-Iscte. Fanni is a PhD at Central European University and also a visiting lecturer at ELTE, Eötvös,
Yes.
Loránd University. Fanni, please
Yes.
help me here.
That was perfect, yes.
Fanni is doing her research in the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at Central University, European University, and her background is in Chinese studies, and she also complemented by studies in cultural anthropology and nationalism studies. Fanni is doing research on golden visas in Hungary. And for this reason, she's working now with me at Lisbon, at CIES, and we are developing a comparative work on Chinese golden visas in Portugal and in Hungary, which has been until so far a fantastic experience. I would also, well, I think this is okay, no, Fanni?
Perfect.
And I will give you the floor for starting.
Thank you very much, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share my screen. Yes. It's working, right? Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for having me here. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to present my work, because this is what I'm going to present as my ongoing research for my PhD. So it has very close links to our collective work with Sofia, and it is also feeding on collaborative research I have been conducting with Professor Palmieri, who is not here today, but I would like to, credit him for everything what I have here as well. So as you can see, the title of the research is For the Sake of Our Child. So this talk will be very much about children, I hope. And apart from that, first I would like to present you my case study about Chinese golden visa immigrants in Budapest, then introduce you my methods and my methodological concerns. So by this, I decided not to go deeply into my theoretical considerations, but I'm very happy for all input you would like to give me on this side, because this is very much work in progress for now. So for now, I would like to introduce my methodological interventions to migration studies, because this work lies on the boundary between, China studies and migration studies, and also increasingly about how child rearing and parenting is embedded in social and economic structures. But for this talk, I'm going to focus on the migration studies aspect of it. And after that, I will come to my findings about how I believe a particular imaginary of a child is being central to this migration wave. And I call him or her, because it could be a her as well. So this child is gender neutral. So the ideal child of state capitalism. And then I will give you some ideas about my theoretical proceedings for now. So my case study is about the Hungarian golden visa scheme. This scheme emerged very much in tandem with other European countries' schemes that emerged after the 2008 economic recession. So many countries, especially in Southern and Eastern Europe, in Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, Malta, Cyprus, but also Latvia or the UK or the Netherlands introduced investor immigration schemes, meaning that in exchange for some form of investment, they would provide residency rights for so-called third country nationals who are outside of the European Union. So these programs have been particularly popular among Chinese nationals, especially the program introduced by Portugal and by Hungary. So the Hungarian scheme operated between 2013 and 17. It has been finished in 2017 because of corruption scandals, the upcoming elections, and the Hungarian government's extremely loud and explicit anti-immigrant rhetoric, which was difficult to complement with the selling of residency rights to immigrants. So this scheme was relatively cheap compared to other European schemes. It costed 2,500 euros in the beginning. Then later on, it got increased to 300,000 euros. But applicants also had to pay a non-refundable fee of 50,000 euros. Well, this was the part where corruption entered into the process, because the schemes could be only sold by 5 designated companies, which were designated by the government, and they all had monopolies in regions of the world, and therefore there was no competition between them. And investigator journalists revealed that these companies all had very close ties to certain government officials. So that's why the scheme got closed in 2017. It was interesting to see how afterwards the Chinese immigrants turned to Greece, apart from Portugal, for purchasing residency rights within the European Union. It's important to note that this scheme did not include the buying of a property. So property consumption came above the purchase of the national state bonds, because this was state bonds. It's a completely passive investment. It has no returns apart from residency rights. And it is also very important to highlight that the scheme was designed to attract only capital and not migrants. This coincided with the government's anti-immigrant agenda, that they would only attract the capital from outside of the country, but not the people who would come with it. So this scheme was specifically designed for migration without settling. And as you can see here, this is the official advertisement of the scheme, which has been particularly targeting Chinese nationals. And on it, you can also see how they highlight this aspect of not having to move to the country. Yes, so in exchange for their investment in national state bonds, I don't know how to collapse these images because I don't see my slides. Okay, so now it's okay. So in exchange for their investment in national state bonds, applicants would receive permanent residence rights, visa exemptions for traveling within the Schengen area, family reunification, the right to work, and apply for citizenship after 8 years, which is actually the same for all immigrants in Hungary. So this was not a big benefit of the scheme. And actually, I think it's not very interesting for Chinese nationals either, but the rest of them, especially the permanent residence rights and family reunification, was the most important benefits Chinese applicants were looking for. Because standing in sharp contrast to the policy's design, a significant number of Chinese applicants did actually decide to move and settle in Budapest. And they, as these figures show, what I wanted to show with these figures is the extremely high number of family reunifications, because this was very much a family strategy for migration. And as opposed to government rhetorics and scheme design, these migrants, like the actual number of how many people did live with the opportunity to settle in Budapest is unknown because of issues with the foreign policing authorities in Hungary. But what is very visible, that the Chinese, the visibility of Chinese people in Budapest's public and leisure places has grown extremely high. So my fieldwork is among those people who wanted to use this opportunity for settling in Budapest, because of course there could have been investors who only wanted to do money laundering or did actually look for some sort of profit-oriented investment. But these are not the people who actually decided to settle in the country. So those people are families, the majority of them families, among whom I have been conducting ethnographic fieldwork since 2017. I have been focusing, I have built very close relationship to 4 families and participated in their leisure and learning activities, and also assisted them in their bureaucratic issues with the Hungarian authorities, as well as in their children's schools. And I also taught several of these children Hungarian for a year. And then apart from these close connections to these 4 families, I conducted interviews with 13 people. And I also conducted digital ethnography on Facebook and WeChat. Particularly interesting to this research is a WeChat chat group, which is called Home Education Sharing Saloon, and it counts over 300 members, Chinese mothers who educate their children in Hungary, and they in this chat group they discuss all their experiences with Hungarian education outside of the education system, so on playgrounds and in shops, and so every minuscule experience they do discuss here apart from educational ambitions. And based on these 3 sources of data, I find the average Chinese golden visa migrant to Budapest to be a middle-class woman from one of China's largest cities, such as Beijing or Shanghai. And she holds a master diploma at least, but I also had some PhDs and very highly educated women. They had very promising careers in the private sector of China's economy, so they all belong to the professional managerial middle class. And they all have at least 1 child, but many of them have 2 as well. They are living in varying family arrangements. Most of them live with the whole family, but almost half of them, a bit less than half of them, lives in an astronaut arrangement, meaning that the husband continues to earn money and provide for the family from China, while the kid and the woman is settled in Budapest. And this is one of my favorite quotes, as Sophia already knows it very well. So what I found is that all these informants represent a surprisingly, almost strikingly homogeneous narrative of why they decided to leave China and why they decided to come to Hungary. And this is something that has been echoed by many of them, that it also grew to be an attractive part of coming to Hungary, that the Chinese people who ended up there were very close in terms of values, that they were neither very rich nor very ambitious, but they just wanted to have a quiet life. So I think it's better if I just read aloud the quote, because it does more than I could. So this mother told me, Chinese mothers think very simply, it's all for the child. You have to sacrifice everything for your child. But actually, our expectations are quite simple. A good enough life in a good enough environment where the kid can be happy. However simple this sounds, we could not realize that in China. And this image is also selected by the same mother. So I asked her to send me images which she thinks represents their life in Hungary. And this was one of the images she selected. And actually all of them represent the children in natural environments where they just enjoy a very carefree childhood. And what I want to draw your attention to on this quote is motherless, like how 2 figures, the sacrificing mother and the child who is happy, are becoming extremely central to this narrative of migration. So through this research, I aim to make 3 interventions to migration studies. One is against the ethnic lens through which migration studies are usually conducted. The other one is perceiving the migrant as homo economicus. And the last one is the adult-centeredness that is characteristic of all social science research, but particularly characteristic of migration studies. I think. So the first one, the ethnic lens, it has been conceptualized by the same Nina Glickschilder, who has worked out the concept of methodological nationalism. So I think the ethnic lens is one form of methodological nationalism, and it also corresponds to Brubaker's notion of essentializing groupism. You can see the references below, but I just quickly define these terms as I understand them. So I will begin with Brubaker's essentializing groupism, who identifies ethnic groupism as a tendency that attributes it's a tendency that considers ethnic groups as substantial entities to which agency can be attributed. And it's also the tendency to reify these groups as internally homogeneous and externally bounded entities. And to migration studies, I think this means that for first, ethnic groups are identified to be the most important categories for migration research. For example, the Chinese in Hungary is one category. This ethnic lens distorts our perception of the migration in two different ways. One way is that it overlooks the internal heterogeneity of how, for example, socially stratified Chinese migrants in Budapest are. And it also distorts our way of perceiving that these migrants do foster relationships that are influential to their migration pathways outside of their ethnic groups, so with non-Chinese people as well. And in this way, it also contributes to a form of methodological nationalism, which Nina Glickschilder and Andreas Wimmer have identified to be a very dominant flaw in all migration studies. Meaning that, so methodological nationalism means that you only perceive social processes as confined within national boundaries, but social processes tend to overlook national boundaries, such as in the case of migration. And in this way, you can focus on not only the receiving country or the host country, but the connection between them and all the other places where migrants have family or friends, or just simply information about going, like aspirations to go to other places. So my intervention to this whole ethnic lens kind of migration studies is to identify the social stratification that took place within Hungary's Chinese diaspora. And this corresponds to the upward concentration that Xiang Piao, a scholar of Chinese migration, has observed about how more wealthy and highly educated people from the megacities of China are going to the global north. So in that sense, it also departs from his observations, because my study focuses on how China is becoming the global north, at least these megacities I'm talking about, Shanghai and Beijing, and how Hungary emerges or decreases rather as a global south for these people. And this is what I'm implying as a macrostructural implication, how this global economic hierarchy has been repositioned with the rise of China. And what I'm looking at, because I'm an anthropologist, not a sociologist, are the micro level implications of this tendency. So how this large economic changes within the world economy are reflected by individuals' personal agency, their aspirations, and how their decision-making processes are influenced and perhaps not determined by these structural changes, but at least influenced for sure. So this would mean to delineate two categories within the Hungarian Chinese diaspora: the economic migrants of the 90s and the lifestyle migrants. The main difference between them is their aspirations. Meaning economic migrants were looking forward to making money, to accumulate capital, While lifestyle migrants, on the other side, they are not aiming at accumulating capital. They do not aim to make any sort of profit through their migration, but they are looking for a better life in more abstract senses, to which I'm going to talk about that later on. So yeah, because this very closely connects to my other intervention to migration studies, which I believe to be extremely preoccupied with the economic rationales driving migration decision making. For this, I invited Weber's distinction between instrumental rationality and value rationality to be to help me to point out how migration studies deals with individual decision making as only an instrumental way to achieve some particular goal, and never as a value rational approach that would somehow include or assess the values and norms that also seem to be very influential in migration decision making. I think lifestyle migration, the framework of lifestyle migration, would also belong to the instrumental rational approaches to migration studies, because its main idea that the lifestyle migrants go abroad to accumulate cultural capital is also a form of a Bourdieusian form of capital accumulation, because that capital could be then changed to other forms of capital later on. And I think choosing Hungary for that is a really good example of not accumulating cultural capital, because unlike the developed country citizenship Fong has coined, that means like Chinese nationals going to the US or Canada or Australia, through that they not only consume a lifestyle, but they also consume prestige for themselves that is readily understood in China. So like having a green card in China is something you don't really have to explain, but easily converts into other forms of symbolic capitals, and also obviously money capital as well, which is not the case for Hungary, which we identified with Professor Pányéri as a form of downscaling within the global hierarchy. And we argued in an article we published last year that this is a pursuit of something else, which we just simply call the European dream, which consists of freedom, safety, and authenticity, and consists of the following elements I listed here: a relaxed education system and lifestyle, green environment, cultural and historical richness, an amenable infrastructure, and a racially wise society. And through these inclinations, the Chinese migrants either explicitly or implicitly, but express a form of disaffection with the norms and values of contemporary Chinese society and perhaps politics. And because of that, I thought that Weber's value rationality, which for some reason I used the German term Wertrationalität, which is value rationality, could be a very fruitful insertion to migration studies. And for this value rational orientation, I invited, through Marxist feminist scholars, the importance of social reproduction and how the economic production and social reproduction are mutually reinforcing each other. And therefore, like, apart from economic production, we should also look at how social reproduction influences migration decision making. And my last intervention is very closely connected to the idea of social reproduction, is the adult-centeredness of migration studies. There are some scholars, I think very few of them, who noted this very pattern-like tendency of migration studies to completely overlook children's role in migration studies. And For example, Orellana was saying that for her, migration study, the adult-centered studies of migration obscure the ways in which children actively shape the nature of their families' journeys, the spaces they move in, and their experiences within those social fields, which I found to be perfectly fitting for my case. And what I also found interesting is that wealthy Chinese immigrants tend to name their children's education in the first place when they say why they decided to move abroad. And scholars tend to completely dismiss this argument and never really focus on how children's education is really very central to these decisions. So my research questions are the following: how and why children acquire such a remarkably dominant role in their parents' migration narrative? How is happy childhood and happy childhood happiness, sorry about that, is imagined and socially constructed? How beliefs about children and childhoods enter into and influence processes of migration? And what do these aspirations themselves about children tell about their parents? So this image is also selected by the same informant I quoted from, and I think it's a pretty good example about how childhood happiness is imagined by these migrants, and how this childhood happiness stands in a very sharp contrast to childhoods in China. And so the title of this slide, "The Escalation of Children's Price and Pricelessness," so I paraphrase Viviana Zalizer's Pricing the Priceless Child, a very important contribution to Marxist feminist understanding of how economic structures form and shape families, but also about the other way around, how families and these sentimental values translate into money and enter into the processes of setting the price in the market. So how they become to be very influential in price making itself. So I think that childhood happiness emerged as a dominant modality or a dominant governmentality in contemporary Chinese society due to the one-child policy that has been in place between 1980 and 2015. And in particular, what I wanted to highlight from the one-child policy is the Suzhou discourse. I'm going to describe it extremely briefly. So the one-child policy was based on an idea of a reverse social engineering, meaning that like they looked at the other parts of the world and said that, look at that, like higher life standards resulted in lower number of births. So if we go the other way around, if we lower the number of births, we could elevate the life standards. So that was the idea. And actually it was really engineers who came up with this idea. So what they wanted to do is, through the reduction of the quantity of the people, they wanted to increase their quality. And Suzhou, it's a very like a notoriously floating signifier. It could mean all sorts of things, but the easiest translation to English of this term is quality. So this notion of how child quality could be improved it has started in the late 70s. So there are many decades throughout which this discourse have been internalized by the public, and how, of course, the state has used it to its own purposes, and of course, the market, because this, as you can see, coincides with China's reform and opening. So it's restructuring as a capitalist market economy. So market forces and state propaganda used this discourse on children quality together to produce new reproductive subjects, the sacrificing mother and the quality child, who appeared in the quotation I used. And in the 2000s, this also coalesced with the rise of middle-class sensibilities and desires that were very much influenced by American models of success, and focused on not only on the future success of the child, but also, and often contradictorily, on his or her present happiness. And for this, both actually both the Chinese state and both market forces have relied on American experts of child rearing, and they wanted to bring into the focus the children's psychological selves and the importance of nurturing well-rounded, creative, and autonomous persons. Because this success model, so this is the success for the state, for the Chinese state, this is important for producing people that are able to make innovations, because this is the part of the economy the Chinese are still lagging behind. So this is a very important national goal to have people who are creative and innovative enough. But on the other side, there is the Chinese education system that remains firmly in place despite of all reform efforts. Which is fiercely competitive, and it's sort of a question of life and death to go through Chinese education today in today's society. And this is largely because of the Gaokao, which is the national entrance examination. It's a central exam that allows you to get into higher education from high school. And you can only take this exam once, and the social processes that surround this exam are horrifying, and the competition begins to like, in order to be able to like, how you say that in English, to enter into a prestigious university in China, like at least in today's common sense, you have to start preparing while your baby is in the womb already. So there are all these success models about how you have to, like, through your pregnancy, through scientific nutrition, and then when the kid is born, from nursery school age. So getting into the right university now means getting into the right nursery school, which is an obsession for many parents and an anxiety for even more. And the rates of clinical depression among teenagers and even younger children are on the rise, as well as teenage suicide. So this is something that has to be taken extremely seriously, and is taken serious by my informants. And there is this popular saying, a popular middle-class Chinese saying, that you don't want to lose by the starting line. That's why you have to start preparing. And this image, this comic graphic, shows all the things a little kid, because as you can see, this kid is not older than maybe 5 years old, but she already has to play the piano, has to learn English, and has to do all the tutorial classes and stuff like that. So you can never stop, because if you stop, then you lose out from the competition. And this results in completely incongruent aspirations. You have to have a child that is happy and well-rounded and has his or her own individuality, but at the same time you have to study from morning to dawn, because otherwise you lose out from the competition. And I think these parents turn to migration as a solution to sort these incongruent aspirations out. So through migration, they open up a new environment that is free from pressure and allows for the reimagination of priorities. And from what I was saying before, I think this is the ideal child of Chinese state capitalism. And here I kind of listed what is required by the centralized state and what is required by the liberalizing market. And these are completely contradictory characteristics of a kid. And if you are a parent, like if you are a practicing child rearer, then you have to sort of attend to both, which is pretty much impossible. So you can't have somebody who is submissive and autonomous, filial and independent, a passive thinker and a critical thinker at the same time. So they sort of perceive this situation, the parents, my informants, as an emergency. So all of them said that they wanted to leave China as soon as possible. And the Hungarian scheme was most attractive because it was extremely quick, as opposed to, for example, a Canadian investor immigration scheme or an Australian one, where the waiting list is 2, 3, 5 years. The Hungarian one was like you applied and then in a month you received your residence card. So it allowed for a very quick relocation. And many of my informants were in crucial life cycle stages, like at least their children, entering elementary school, entering high school, and stuff like that. So these quotations, I don't know if I'm taking already too long or should I read them? Am I taking too long?
No, it's okay. It's fine.
Should I read them?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
We can then stay a bit longer if it's necessary. That's
okay.
fine.
Thank you very much then. So this is these both quotations, I think, not only tell about why they wanted to leave China, but also about their aspirations in Hungary. So in the Chinese education system, in the Chinese education, children are treated as robots who have to work all day. There is not one tiny bit of playing around, happiness, not a bit of freedom. Studying from morning to dawn, I think that's not healthy. In China, you must study well. There is no other option but to be the best in everything. So I think this quotation not only criticizes the competitiveness of Chinese education system, but also paints a very vivid picture about this kid who is happily playing around. And this is also constitutive of the kid's freedom, which I think to be a very central element in this relocation. So freedom have been emphasized in many ways, not against the Chinese authoritarian regime, but as a quality of childhood. And it's more closely related to time, to having time, because in China, they don't have time. They have to study from morning to dawn. So what they don't have is time. And through this relocation, they bought some time, and this time in return allows children to develop their individual inclinations, to have hobbies, to know what they like, to know who they are and know what they like. And this is a strikingly neoliberal idea of a person, as opposed to like traditional Chinese ideas of personhood. And the other quotation is actually very similar, but does a bit more. So in China, expectations are very high. You have to paint, you have to swim, you have to play the piano and speak English, of course. You have to do everything professionally, go to training classes all the time. Our salary is not high enough to pay for all the classes for the kid. And I don't think like that. I think the kid should have one thing he likes, be good at it, and that's it. So this quotation also brings in the financial, the economic aspect of Chinese child rearing. So in China, the child industry, including children's clothing, services to children, and most importantly, educational resources for children, are one of the most booming industries within Chinese economy. So like an English class for a kid, it's around 100 euros, which is, I don't know how many, much higher than in Hungary. So in Hungary, these parents decided to take a more laid back attitude toward child rearing. But since I already started my field research quite a few years ago, I realized that this laid back attitude is not something maintainable, sustainable. So I realized that there is a growing anxiety among my friends and informants about losing out in the competition in the end. And this has been growing in the past years, only I think because they just spent too much time with playing in the sandbox, as one of them said. So they think that in Hungary, their child is not progressing quick enough and efficiently enough because there is too much playing around. And this quotation, I should have brought that one about the sandbox, is I think the most tally. So this mother went back to China and for summer, and when she returned for the next school year, her son was in the graduate year of kindergarten. So her son was 5-year-old at the time. And she said that she was very frightened because for the whole summer, the Chinese 5-year-olds were studying math and writing, while in Hungary, the Chinese 5-year-olds were just playing in the sandbox and did not study at all. So she was fearing that how could her son compete with such children if she is not doing enough. So there is this fear of losing out nonetheless, even though there was a very conscious and deliberate commitment to this carefree childbearing, which is not sustainable after a while. So this is my conclusion, which is very preliminary, I would say. So I understand this move to Budapest as a very rational choice, as a value rational choice, a self-conscious downscaling that is aimed at raising happy but nonetheless competitive children. So through this, I think it's very important that these migrants do renounce the norms and values of China's material modernity. And this material modernity not only includes the capitalist restructuring of the state, but also the increasingly authoritarian measures of the state itself. So this is a combined critique of state and capitalism and state capitalism. So what I think is also very novel in this mobility is the emergence of the present as the most significant temporality of decision making. So instead of calculating future benefits that, you know, some form of accumulation of some form of capital would entail, these people do not deliberate on what kind of capital they should be accumulating. They just want to focus on the present affective quality of life. So just feeling good, basically. And then I would somehow tackle this ambivalence between freedom and happiness, rejecting competitive pressure in the name of freedom and the renewed search for competition. So I should somehow make sense of that, which I'm at the beginning of. And I like the main argument I would like to make is that this shifting and contradictory ideals of parenting reflect the ambivalent position of the Chinese middle class, who are caught in the crossfires of China's liberalizing market and tightening autocracy. So I think that was it. Here are my references, most of them, and my thank you slide. So thank you very much for listening to me for such a long time, and sorry for taking so long.
Thank you so much, Fanni. It was really a fascinating presentation, full of ideas, full of challenges, and I'm really glad to have you here and presenting your work. I will now open the floor for talks, questions. Someone who wants to address any question, please do, either on chat or just speaking with us, please.
I would be very happy for all feedbacks and inputs.
Yes. Okay, I can start if no one drives you a question. I have so many things to say. Some of them we have been discussing in our talks, you know, and I think you bring here really a very intelligent analysis of macrostructural ideology of the Chinese state and capitalism, and migration linked to educational or family reasons. While I was listening to you, I always think, what do we have in migration studies that best addresses or best describes these kinds of migration? Because we have investment migration, you know, states just defines it, Portuguese, Hungarian, or other states that legislated real golden visas issues. So we have a state that wishes to attract money, investment, not migrants, but as we said, and using Merton's words, there is a non-fulfilling prophecy, which means that in the end, it ended by attracting migrants that initially were not predicted. And these migrants are totally different from investment migrants. Of course, they are middle-class migrants with a great capacity of consumption, at least compared with Portuguese middle class or Hungarian middle class, but they wish to be migrants. But what are we assisting here, seeing here? Is this family migration? Because if so, how can we define this family migration or educational migration, as we mentioned, which for me is quite different from international student mobility? Is this lifestyle migration, but addressed to children and centralized to children? So what kind of concept do we have, or if we don't have, we might need to invent one, because we are seeing this quite obviously. And of course, not only in Hungary, but also in Portugal, where the migrants that I also interviewed mentioned the educational perspective and focus on the education for children in a happy, healthy environment, as in Hungary, in order to live. So how can we redefine migration theories and create another concept, or at least several pieces of concepts already describing this? So this is a question that I don't know the answer. Another question is this idea of downscaling, the fact that migrants that go to Hungary are facing downscaling. When you define downscaling, are you defining how downscaling economically or professionally? And you are doing so in relation to their lives in China and their revenues in China. So what is the origin of this concept, and why is it downscaling? Because if for them it's not an economic migration, sometimes it's an investment migration, because they also link this idea of putting their assets in another country, at least here in Portugal. While they educate their children and they have a better environment, they also have this second option of putting their savings or investing in another houses, at least in Portugal, while they are here. So it's kind of a mixture of intentions that somehow they hide. But why is it downscaling? Because either you consider China as the global north and Hungary as the global south, and in this, in this difference, you can place this concept. But for me, it's not completely understandable why Europe is the global south. You know what I mean? So for me, the idea they have of Europe, this European dream that you and Paul Neary mentioned, all the countries in Europe somehow enclose these ideas of freedom, safety, authenticity, because Europe is, for Chinese, is a group of countries full of history and Western environment, etc. So this idea of downscaling and seeing not Europe, but Hungary or Portugal as semi-peripheral countries, that they come here to and they go down on their level of prestige, if you want, is not clear to me. So, but this is just a guess. I now see here Sandra, who says to everyone, hello, I really enjoyed the presentation. The team of my PhD thesis focus on the Chinese migration population resident in Portugal. I had a lot of difficulties for them to answer my questionnaires. How did you get access to them? Was it also difficult for you? Okay, so I stop here, just open the floor for questions if apart Sandra. So please, Fanny.
Okay, so
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Hello,
sorry.
it's Urban there. Okay.
Yeah, hi, my name is Urban Jaksh. I'm a researcher here at CIES. I'm neither an expert on migration nor an expert on China, but I found your presentation really fascinating, especially the fact that you focus away from economic rationalism and away from adults focusing on children. But as a political scientist, my question would be, to what extent do parents' political preferences play into these migration patterns? To what extent is their attitude towards the Chinese government a push factor? And to what extent is the Hungarian political climate, let's put it like that, a pull factor? So Hungarian government promoting traditional and conservative value, does that serve to attract Chinese migrants to Hungary rather than to, I don't know, they would maybe be going to Cyprus or to Malta otherwise? So yeah.
Thank you
so
very much for the question. It's an excellent question. And I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation as a political theorist. So that's a very important question, I think, for both of us with Sophia, because in that article, I mentioned the China's new culture burgers, which has been published and I co-authored with Palmieri. It explicitly tackles this question and argues that, as opposed to other parts, like other trends in Chinese migration, which always identifies long-distance nationalism to be a core characteristic of those mobilities, like Chinese cosmopolitan nationalists who are extremely loyal to the Chinese state, and which has also characterized Chinese migration to Hungary in the past, from the 90s up until this migration. So those migrants have an unquestioned loyalty to the Chinese state. And I think for me, and this is something I'm not having an agreement with everybody, but I think for me, this migration, this mobility of the golden visa migrants is at times even explicitly going against the Chinese state. So it's their inclination to freedom and happiness. So I had informants who explicitly said that they wanted to bring up their children in a democracy, because in China there is no freedom, you cannot do whatever you want to do. But this lack of freedom, I think it's very like meticulously constituted, and authoritarian regime is only part of it. And as big as a part of it is the liberalizing market that makes you work more and more and more and more, and you don't have any time to be free. So that's why I said I think it's a collective critique of Chinese state capitalism, and I think it does figure into their decision to leave. It would be very interesting to know how it figures into their choice of destination countries, because what we found in Hungary with Palmieri was that they embraced the Orban government's anti-immigration narrative to a very high extent, which was, hilarious. So they said that Hungary is a good country because Orban. This mother said, you know why I like Orban? Because she didn't let the bad migrants in, the riffraff, the people of like whatever kind of people, by which she meant the refugees from the Middle East. And also that there are no African immigrants in Hungary, basically, like as compared to Portugal, for example. And she likes Orban because of that, because she knew that way the good migrants would not come. And now in Hungary, there are only good migrants, meaning German migrants and French migrants and American migrants who are fleeing multiculturalism in their own home societies. So this nativist nationalist rhetoric that is being pushed by the Orban government is very attractive to these migrants. And we wanted to find out whether those migrants who choose Hungary are on the right side of the liberals in China, and maybe those who choose Portugal are much more liberal minded, so they are on the left side, but we have no idea about this. So we would need a lot more research about how political inclinations figure into the decision to choose a country, to choose a destination. But that's a very interesting question, I think, as well. And about the methods question by Sandra about accessing Chinese migrants, I have been trying to research Chinese migrants for many years now, and before this golden visa mobility, I had great difficulties. Like, even though my Chinese was the same as now, so I am pretty much fluent in Chinese, but I just couldn't get anybody to answer my questions, you know, and I had to travel a lot to go to the Chinese districts of Budapest and stuff like that. And this new mobility was like striking to me, because I didn't have to go to other places in the city, but the Chinese migrants were all over the city, where I'm, as a middle-class mother, going to, you know, playground and beaches and places. They were everywhere, and in the kindergartens of my children, in the schools of my children. So I didn't have to move around. They were there, and they were extremely happy to come into conversation with me, which was something very new. And I think it's also telling a lot about their inclination to integrate into the society, which also tells about this previous question about their renunciation of China. So they don't foster as strong ties to China as earlier migrants did, and they want to foster stronger ties to Hungary as earlier migrants did. And they also have a lot more free time. That's another aspect of it, because they don't work, so they just they have like infinite free time to answer sociologists and anthropologists' questions, unlike labor migrants who work 7 days a week. So I think it was about that.
Yeah, but let me just add something, Fanny. The fact that you speak Mandarin, it's fundamental, because they can easily get connected to you and talk to you, because when we don't speak Mandarin, we do need some kind of intermediaries to connect, you know. And I also think it's a very important thing here. And also the fact that they are more highly educated, and some of them also speak, at least in Portugal, English, because I don't speak Mandarin, and most of the interviews were in English or in Portuguese in the cases that they could speak Portuguese. So this is a very important cue while researching Chinese migrants, I think.
Yes, I started to research Chinese migrants because I spoke Chinese, so that's how it came.
I don't speak. I just speak a little of Mandarin, and I had to ask a person, a Chinese friend, to help me, because I need to go every capital of the district in Portugal to have the answers that I need, more than 300 questionnaires. So it was very difficult. And when I approached them, they always ask, they were afraid of, we were from the immigrant service, CEF, or from the Chinese government. It was really fun, because they are very suspicious person.
Yes,
they are afraid to answer. At least it seems that they were very afraid because of that.
Yes, in Hungary, I think Chinese migrants all over the globe are very suspicious, either because they are pro-China or because they are anti-China, but they are suspicious for any reasons. And I think for me, that's a great asset that I just don't look like someone who fosters close enough ties to either the Hungarian immigration office or the Chinese state. So I look messy, you know, and that's something comforting for them. So it's, you know, I just don't look like someone very official. So
it's the
that's
same.
a great asset. Yes.
Okay.
But Fanny, do you speak a good Chinese?
Well, good. Like I speak Chinese, so like this or that. So
yeah,
my pronunciation is not perfect. There are words I don't understand. So I'm not, you know, like a native Chinese speaker for sure, but I'm fluent. So I have been studying. Yes, I have been studying for many years.
Okay. Congratulations. It's a difficult language.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
hello.
Hi, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Fanny. It was such a fascinating presentation. I really like the narrative. I lost some bits in the middle because I had some movement inside the house, but I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I was actually wondering on the conclusions bit that you were telling of how it was very much about the present and not the future, and that economic capital and accumulation of capital is not as well thought, or at least not well integrated. And I was thinking about Bourdieu's understanding of transfer of capital, because that was this is how this is like a paradox, right? Because it is through money that some sort of cultural capital can be accumulated, whereas it's through education for their children, or the possibility of having access of different cultural backgrounds and international or westernized lifestyles. I was wondering if you thought about that, or
yes, I did. Thank you very much for asking. This is something I think about a lot, and even more as I start to understand more the Portuguese case. And I did an interview yesterday, for example, and I think there is a significant difference in the Portuguese and the Hungarian mobility in that sense, because in Hungary, these people enroll their children in public education, Hungarian public education, sometimes bilingual, but in many cases not even bilingual. So they at tops have enhanced English, meaning that they have 3 classes of English a day. But the children are sitting in Hungarian classes without a single hint of any knowledge of Hungarian, which is another very difficult language, which in extra has no use outside of the country at all. So it's one of the most difficult languages that is completely useless outside of Hungary. So having this idea, you know, like in Hungary, we do have private international schools, as you do in Portugal. But here they enroll their children in those schools in St. Julien, for example, right? And in Hungary, for some reason, they don't. And I think this is something that cannot be interpreted as an accumulation of any form of cultural capital, you know, because otherwise I would agree that, yeah, right. So this puts them on a track that is leading to some form of international higher education and stuff like that. But this way they are put on a track that doesn't go anywhere. Like that, you know, like they could go to Hungarian universities, which are not the best, and they have even smaller chances to get into international higher education because they spend all their time and energy learning Hungarian. So that puts them back, as well as they have smaller chances in the Hungarian education competition because they are not native speakers. And since Hungary is an anti-immigrant state, so the state is extremely anti-immigrant, there is no assistance for migrant integration. So children are simply set back a few grades below themselves, and that's the only help they got. And after that, teachers evaluate non-native speakers the same as they do native speakers. So a Hungarian grammar test is the same for a Chinese kid and the Hungarian kid, which is like kind of crazy, but that's how it goes. And in the exam, they just, earn a little points because they are not aware of the nuances of how you put an objective to a known and an unknown whatever. So, it's crazy. So I think for this, it is, and it's also a way of answering Sophia's question about downscaling. So I think this is downscaling. So this is having so much disadvantage in the mainstream understanding of capital accumulation. So they lose all forms of cultural capital, they lose all forms of symbolic capital in exchange for something unknown. Like they do. I mean, obviously, you always accumulate your capital. Whatever happens, your life could be interpreted as accumulating capital, whatever you do. But this is something very difficult to interpret as a strategical accumulation of capital. And the downscaling, I think it's also like in terms of the mothers' lives, it's very important because they had promising careers in China. So they are not only highly educated, but they were competitive on the job market as well. So they had good positions and stuff like that. That's why most of them say that this was a sacrifice for them, that they gave up their careers to bring their children to Hungary. And in that, I think it's very much like the American middle class women who are going to be housewives in the suburbs. And I sort of have this idea that it's not even global north, global south, but Budapest is like a suburb for urban Chinese families, right? So it's
no, it's great. But I understand now what you mean by downscaling. I'm not so sure about the centrality of the present.
Yes, I might.
I'm not so sure because because I think they know, and this is an ongoing discussion. Well, between me and Fanny, because we speak a lot about this, and I somehow think they consider the future. So they also move because they see a better future in terms of education, in Western education for their children, either because they want them to go to London, to a more central district of Europe than Lisbon or Budapest, or because they consider an open future for their children. And I'm speaking this based on the interviews I had among my golden visas. So this idea of future is there. This downscaling can also be considered not accidental, but part of a longer strategy in time. So they know they need to adapt 1-2 years their children for learning the language. And but I think they are doing that and sacrificing that because they know that in long term they can be rewarded with other symbolic capital that they might accumulate, prestige, better life, whatever it be,
Yes, and this idea of having culture is something that is recurring in my interviews as well. So I brought her here to have culture. You have to have culture. This was something that really stuck with me, this whole idea. And it also corresponds to this, to this idea that by being in Europe, then Hungary, by definition, have to have culture, history, richness, and also your idea about the linguistic capital they accumulate. So this also could be interpreted as an alternative strategy for the educational competition in China, because English is something that everybody speaks. So you have to have a further asset in order to be even more competitive. So this could be something which actually my interviewee yesterday, the Portuguese one, they mentioned is that everybody speaks English. Then he also, like my son also speaks Portuguese, but in Hungarian, this is rarely mentioned. Like they see learning Hungarian as a pain in the ass. I'm sorry for that, but that's how they see it. So it's just, something really troublesome and of little worth, apart from going through your everydays. So it's really something painful for them.
Yeah, yes, but it's part of the social integration they must have. So
yes, this inclination towards integration, that's I think something very new and very interesting.
Yes, because somehow they live in a bubble, of course, because they get to know all the other golden visa, etc. But they try, at least for the children, to get integrated in some dimensions of society with teachers, other educators, whatever. And they, of course, have an inclination to speak the language and learn the language that is completely different from economic Chinese migrants here.
But who actually do speak better Portuguese, I assume, than the golden visa, because they have to speak Portuguese. So yeah. I mean, at least in Hungary, the economic migrants, they like through their services, they speak like perfectly the language they need. You know, like selling goods, receiving orders in restaurants and stuff like that. They are perfectly fluent in Hungarian, though they don't want to be. Unlike the golden visa, who want to speak Hungarian, but you know, they can go beyond greeting.
I think it's also a strategy to get into the labor market, although they know they cannot be as competitive as other Portuguese with the same qualifications because they don't speak fluently Portuguese. And this is another question, because this is a quite recent immigration or mobility. And in a few years, it would be interesting to understand what kind of labor strategies, professional strategies did they use in order to get active again. And some of my interviews were starting business, you know, with other Chinese or transnational links with China and Portugal. Some of the women I knew were learning Portuguese and teaching Chinese in exchange of Portuguese classes, but this was for fun, just for money, of course. It's just to get into the social culture of the country.
Yes, this is something many of my informants also say, that they are bored for not working. So they worked so much and so hard in China, and for a few months they enjoyed this semi-retired lifestyle in their 30s or 40s. So they are pretty young for being retired. And then after a while they are being bored. And like the only reason they would pick up a job is to entertain themselves. It's interesting how this post-materialist reorientation really works. And I think this is a very specifically middle-class phenomenon, and I think we should somehow focus on that as well. And I think the centrality of children is also a peculiarly middle-class phenomenon across the globe. So because this is the only class where the right to belong to the class is not inherited, as for, you know, the working class and the elite, they just simply inherit their status to their offspring. But in the middle class, you always have to work through your way through being middle class through education. So I think this is a very global phenomenon that in China becomes just very visible because of the size.
Yes, no, sure. And the specificities of China, politically, economically, and socially, it's quite obvious that, Right. I don't know if there are any other questions. Tanya, do you want to, or anyone else?
Well, I could keep on going, but I think like we can have other opportunities as well.
Yeah,
I hope so.
Okay, I don't know if no one has questions, I would leave it here. Don't know if you want to add something, Fanny?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Thank you very much for listening to me for so long, and thank you all of you for your questions.
No, it was fascinating. And if you want to put your email here, just to share it in the chat, maybe someone wants to contact you, or
that would be great. So please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Urban. Where are you from, Urban? Because are you Hungarian?
No.
I know, I'm from Slovenia, neighboring country.
Great. Oh God, it's so good. These chat meetings, you know, these Zoom meetings make us so close to other European countries with the world. So that's great. Do you have in Slovenia any kind of golden visa or any kind of investment program that is comparable to this?
I'm based in Lisbon at ELTE,
Oh.
so but at CIES, which is a bit different. But no, as far as I know, we don't have a golden visa program.
Yes, I think they don't.
No,
Okay.
I don't think there's even they're even considering establishing one.
Okay.
I think like around those central and eastern countries, it's only Bulgaria that has one.
Oh, really? And what kind of conditions do they have, criteria to, do you know that?
Yeah, I think it's in the Christine Schurek article about
Right.
the comparison of European golden visa schemes. I think it's the same passive investment kind of, but it's not popular among Chinese, so I discarded it.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah, I need to look to have a more comparable approach on this because we are, of course, speaking about the same phenomenon. This
Yeah,
is,
I think we should find somebody from Greece because Greece is very popular.
yeah, yeah. And I think there's no paper on that, on Greece. Did you find something on Tanya?
It's just articles.
No?
I mean, like journal art, not journal, but magazine articles.
Okay. Great. So, well, I don't know. I will leave it here if there is no other question. Anyway, I thank you so much for presenting. I think you must be very, very advanced in your writing process of your PhD because you have so clear your ideas and so well structured and on the analytic framework, you know.
Just a matter of presentation, I'm very behind.
Oh, well, it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem. But anyway, we keep talking, of course.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
Well, thank you so much to all of you and keep in touch. Sophia, thank you so much. Sophia is our...
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fanny.
Thank you
all.
Thank you, Sophia.
It was a wonderful workshop.
Yes,
Thanks.
It was. Thank you so much to all and well, take care, okay, and be healthy.
Thank you all.
Healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.